In the summer of 1994, 7 college friends set off for a weekend camping trip in the remote forests of northern Idaho. They brought hiking boots, sleeping bags, and dreams of adventure under the stars. They never came home. For 30 years, their disappearance remained one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting mysteries, until 2024, when a metal detector enthusiast made a discovery that would finally reveal what happened during those 3 missing days in the wilderness. What he found buried beneath decades of pine needles and forest debris wasn't just evidence. It was a window into horror. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe if you love deep-dive cold cases, shocking revelations, and true crime mysteries that refuse to stay buried. June 17, 1994. Location: Clearwater National Forest, Idaho. The morning mist clung to the pines like cigarette smoke as 7 friends loaded their gear into 2 beat-up Honda Civics outside the University of Idaho dormitories. It was the kind of perfect June day that made you forget about finals, summer jobs, and the real world pressing in from all sides. The air smelled of pine sap and possibility. Sarah Chun, 21, pre-med student with a laugh that could fill a room, adjusted the straps on her hiking pack and checked her camera for the 3rd time. She'd brought 3 rolls of film, determined to document every moment of what she called their last hurrah before everyone scattered for internships and summer work. "Ready for the wilderness, city girl?" teased Marcus Rodriguez, 22, whose idea this trip had been. He'd grown up camping with his father in these same forests, knew every trail marker and hidden creek bed within a 50-mile radius. Sarah rolled her eyes and shouldered her pack. "I've been camping before. Car camping doesn't count," said Jake Morrison, 20, already sweating in his brand-new hiking boots. He was the group's comedian, the one who could make anyone laugh even during finals week. The other 4, Emma Walsh, 19, quiet art student with paint-stained fingers; David Kim, 22, computer science major who'd brought his new digital camcorder to film everything; Lisa Thompson, 21, psychology student with a fascination for ghost stories; and Ryan Foster, 23, the group's de facto leader and Marcus's roommate. Finished loading supplies with the efficient chaos of college students who'd done this dance before. They'd planned 3 days at Whispering Creek Campground, a remote site 40 miles northeast of Moscow, accessible only by a winding Forest Service road that turned to gravel after the first 10 miles. It was primitive camping, no electricity, no cell towers, no running water. Just them, the forest, and 72 hours of freedom. The drive took 2 hours, windows down, music loud, everyone talking at once about summer plans and next semester's classes. Lisa read ghost stories aloud from a paperback she'd brought, making Emma cover her ears and beg her to stop. David filmed everything through the passenger window of the second car, the new Sony camcorder feeling heavy and important in his hands. They reached the trailhead at 11:47 a.m. The parking area was empty except for a rusted pickup truck with Montana plates and a camper shell, its owner nowhere to be seen. Marcus checked the trail register, noting only 3 entries in the past month. Perfect. They'd have the wilderness to themselves. The hike to their campsite took 90 minutes, following Whispering Creek through dense forest that seemed to swallow sound. Even their laughter felt muted under the cathedral of pines. David filmed sporadically, capturing Sarah slipping on wet rocks, Jake's running commentary about everything from the height of the trees to the quality of the trail snacks, Marcus pointing out wildlife tracks in the mud. They made camp in a clearing beside the creek, close enough to hear the water but far enough back to avoid the mosquitoes. 7 tents in a rough circle, a fire ring built from creek stones, camp chairs arranged around the flames that wouldn't come until evening. By 2:30 p.m., they were settled, lunch eaten, ready for 3 days of hiking, swimming in the creek's deep pools, and the kind of conversations that only happened around campfires. At 3:15 p.m., David filmed Sarah and Emma skipping stones across a beaver pond upstream from camp. The footage, later recovered and enhanced, would show something else in the background, a figure in dark clothing watching from the opposite shore, too distant to identify, but clearly human, clearly still. None of them noticed. June 18, 1994. Location: Whispering Creek Campground, Idaho. The first night passed without incident. David's camcorder captured fragments, Jake telling increasingly elaborate stories around the fire, Lisa reading palms by flashlight. Marcus and Ryan debating the best route for tomorrow's day hike. Sarah photographed everything with her 35mm camera, the flash briefly illuminating faces laughing in the darkness. They woke to fog and the sound of rain on tent fabric. Not hard rain, just the steady Pacific Northwest drizzle that could last for hours. Perfect weather for staying in camp, playing cards, talking. David filmed Lisa attempting to make pancakes on their camp stove while Emma sketched the misty forest in her journal. At 10:23 a.m., according to David's timestamp, they heard the first engine. It came from downstream, the low rumble of a vehicle moving slowly through the forest. Marcus looked up from the card game they'd started. Probably just Forest Service, he said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The nearest road was 3 miles away, and this sounded closer. The engine noise stopped, then started again. Stopped, like someone was looking for something. Should we check it out? Jake asked, but Marcus shook his head. None of our business. Probably just lost hunters or something. They returned to their game, but the easy mood had shifted. Sarah noticed it first, the way everyone kept glancing toward the tree line, the way conversations lagged. She started taking more pictures, nervous energy needing an outlet. At 11:45 a.m., David's camera captured something none of them saw at the time. While filming Emma's latest sketch, the lens briefly panned across the forest behind her. In the background, barely visible through the trees, a shape moved. Human-sized, deliberate. There for 3 seconds, then gone. The footage would later be enhanced by FBI analysts, but the figure remained too distant, too obscured by vegetation to identify. Lunch was quieter than usual. Lisa tried to lighten the mood with more ghost stories, but even Jake's usual commentary felt forced. The rain had stopped, but the forest remained hushed, expectant. At 2:17 p.m., they heard voices. Not close, but not distant either. Male voices, at least 2, maybe 3. The words were indistinct, but the tone was clear, organized, purposeful, like people working together on something. Okay, that's weird, Sarah said, lowering her camera. There's supposed to be nobody else out here. Marcus stood, scanning the tree line. Could be day hikers. The trail connects to the main logging road about 5 miles east. But Ryan shook his head. Those voices aren't moving. They're stationary, like they're set up somewhere. David grabbed his camcorder, started filming toward the sound. The audio pickup wasn't great, but it captured the distant murmur of conversation, too faint to understand but clearly present. Emma closed her sketchbook. I don't like this. We're being paranoid, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's just other people enjoying the forest. The voices continued for another hour, then stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. The friends tried to return to their relaxed mood, but something had changed. They were no longer alone, and everyone felt it. That evening, as they prepared dinner, David filmed what would become the last normal footage of the trip. 7 friends around a camp stove, Sarah and Lisa arguing about seasoning, Jake doing impressions of their professors, Emma showing her sketches from the day. Marcus and Ryan discussed tomorrow's hike, a challenging route to a series of waterfalls 6 miles upstream. The timestamp on David's camera read 7:23 p.m. when they heard the first scream. It came from downstream, echoing off the canyon walls. High-pitched, desperate, cut short. Animal or human, impossible to tell. They all froze. Jake's impression died mid-sentence. Sarah's hand went to her camera instinctively. What the hell was that? Lisa whispered. Marcus was already reaching for his flashlight. Probably an elk. They make weird noises during mating season. In June, Ryan asked. Another scream, closer this time. Definitely human. Female. Terrified. David's camera captured their faces in that moment. 7 college students realizing their weekend adventure had just become something else entirely. June 19th, 1994. Location: Whispering Creek Campground, Idaho. Nobody slept well. Every snapped twig, every rustle of wine through the pines brought heads up, ears straining. David kept his camcorder beside his sleeping bag, finger on the record button. Sarah loaded fresh film in her camera and kept it within arm's reach. Dawn came gray and cold, the forest wrapped in fog so thick they could barely see 20 feet in any direction. They built up the fire, made coffee, spoke in hushed voices about what they'd heard the night before. We should hike out, Emma said, stirring her instant oatmeal without eating it. This doesn't feel right. Marcus shook his head. We're not running because of some weird noises. Probably just had an encounter with wildlife, made some noise. Animals scream when they're scared or hurt. That wasn't an animal, Lisa said firmly. I know what I heard. David had been reviewing the footage from the night before, rewinding and listening to the audio over and over. The screams came from downstream, he said. Same direction as those voices yesterday. So? Jake asked, though his usual humor was noticeably absent. So maybe we should avoid that direction, Sarah suggested. We were planning to hike upstream anyway. They decided to stick with their original plan, a day hike to the waterfalls, return to camp by evening, pack out in the morning. One more night, then home to hot showers and familiar beds. At 8:47 a.m., according to David's timestamp, they broke camp and headed upstream. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing glimpses of the pine canopy overhead. David filmed their departure, capturing 7 backpacks disappearing into the mist. The trail followed the creek closely, winding through stands of old-growth pine and Douglas fir. The sound of moving water masked their footsteps, their voices, any other sounds the forest might be hiding. David filmed sporadically a beaver dam, Sarah helping Emma across a fallen log, Marcus pointing out deer tracks in the mud. At 10:15 a.m., they found the first sign. It was Jake who spotted it, a piece of blue fabric caught on a branch about 4 feet off the ground. Not weathered, not old. Fresh. That's from a rain jacket, Ryan said, examining it without touching. REI. Maybe Patagonia. Marcus checked his map. We're about 2 miles from camp. This isn't on any official trail. Sarah took pictures while David filmed. The fabric fluttered in the slight breeze, too clean and bright to have been there long. Someone lost a piece of their jacket, Lisa said. People hike off trail all the time. But Emma was studying the branch itself. Look at how it's caught. The fabric's torn upward, like it was ripped off by someone moving fast. Running, maybe. They continued hiking, but the mood had shifted again. David's camera captured their increasingly nervous glances, the way they moved closer together, how conversations died mid-sentence when anyone heard an unexpected sound. At 11:33 a.m., they found the backpack. It was sitting beside the trail, propped against a tree as if someone had just set it down for a rest. Orange and black, expensive-looking, barely worn. No name tags, no identification, but clearly abandoned. Marcus circled it slowly, flashlight beam playing over the zippers and straps. Pack's not weathered. Clean. Been here maybe a day, 2 at most. Should we open it? Sarah asked, camera ready. Probably not, Ryan said. Could be evidence of something. Evidence of what? Jake's voice cracked slightly. Someone just left their pack. People leave gear behind all the time. But David was filming the area around the backpack, and his camera caught something else. Disturbed earth, scuff marks in the dirt, signs of a struggle. The timestamp read 11:41 a.m. Guys, he said quietly, I think we should go back. That's when they heard the voices again. Closer this time. Much closer. Coming from the direction they'd been heading, upstream, toward the waterfalls. Multiple male voices, urgent, organized. And underneath the conversation, something else. Machinery. The distant sound of an engine, maybe a generator. Loggers, Marcus suggested hopefully. But they all knew better. This was federal wilderness. No logging permitted. Sarah lowered her camera. We need to leave. Now. They turned around, moving faster than before, no longer pretending this was a casual hike. David filmed over his shoulder, capturing glimpses of the forest behind them, looking for movement, for signs they were being followed. At 12:23 p.m., they heard the dogs. Baying, howling, the sound of hounds on a scent. Coming from multiple directions, getting closer. Run, Marcus said. They ran. June 19, 1994. Location, Whispering Creek Forest, Idaho. Time, 2:47 p.m. David's camcorder bounced wildly as they fled through the forest, the automatic stabilization system struggling to keep up with their panicked movement. The footage from this period would later be crucial, 7 minutes and 33 seconds of chaotic, terrifying video that documented their final desperate attempt to escape. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. when they stopped running, gasping for breath in a small clearing beside a granite outcrop. They'd left the main trail 20 minutes ago, following Marcus through dense undergrowth toward what he hoped was a route back to their camp. Which way? Sarah panted, gripping her camera so tightly her knuckles were white. Marcus studied his compass, hands shaking. East, I think. Maybe southeast. The creek should be that way. You think? Lisa's voice was high, strained. Marcus, you said you knew these woods. I do know them, but we're off the marked trails now. Everything looks different. David continued filming, the camera capturing their frightened faces, the way they kept looking over their shoulders. In the background, barely audible above their breathing, the distant sound of voices. Still following. Still getting closer. Emma sat on a fallen log, head in her hands. This was supposed to be fun. It's going to be fine, Ryan said, though his voice betrayed his own fear. We just need to get back to camp, grab our gear, and hike out to the cars. Jake laughed, a sound without humor. And what if they're waiting at the cars? They who? Sarah demanded. Who are we running from? What did we stumble into? None of them had an answer. At 2:51 p.m., David's camera captured movement in the trees behind them. A flash of dark clothing, there and gone. He spun around, filming the forest, but saw nothing. We need to keep moving, Marcus said. They moved southeast, following deer trails through the undergrowth, trying to stay quiet while covering ground quickly. David filmed sporadically now, conserving battery life, but the audio continued recording everything. Their labored breathing, the crack of branches underfoot, and underneath it all, the persistent sound of pursuit. At 3:15 p.m., they reached Whispering Creek. The water looked different from this angle, wider and faster than they remembered. Marcus checked his map again, trying to orient himself. Camp should be about a mile downstream, he said. We follow the water, stay quiet, get our gear, and get out. What if they're already there? Emma asked. Marcus didn't answer. They moved along the creek bank, single file, David bringing up the rear with his camera. The timestamp read 3:23 p.m. when they saw the smoke. It was rising from the direction of their campsite, black and thick. Not the thin gray smoke of a campfire. Something was burning. Something big. Our gear, Lisa whispered. They crept closer, moving from tree to tree, until they could see the clearing where they'd made camp. David's camera captured the scene through the branches, their tents, their carefully arranged camp chairs, everything in flames. The fire was too organized, too complete to be accidental. And standing around the burning camp, watching it burn, were 3 men in dark clothing. David zoomed in as much as the camera would allow. The men were older, weathered, dressed like hunters or military. One carried what looked like a rifle. Another spoke into a handheld radio. At 3:29 p.m., one of the men turned and looked directly toward their hiding spot. Run, Marcus breathed. They ran again. June 19, 1994. Location, Whispering Creek Forest, Idaho. Time, 4:15 p.m. The forest became a maze of panic and shadow. David's camcorder recorded fragments, flashes of pine bark, glimpses of his friends stumbling through undergrowth, the rapid breathing that accompanied their flight. They'd lost the creek, lost their bearings, lost any pretense that this was anything other than a fight for survival. At 4:15 p.m., they found the cabin. It sat in a small clearing, hidden from any trail, built from weathered logs and corrugated metal. No electricity lines, no vehicle access, just a structure that shouldn't have existed in federal wilderness. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. Someone was home. They crouched in the tree line, watching. David filmed through the branches, the camera capturing every detail. The cabin was larger than it first appeared, with additions built onto the original structure. A generator hummed somewhere behind the building. Fuel barrels were stacked beside what looked like a workshop. Drug lab, Ryan whispered. Has to be. That's what this is about. Marcus nodded slowly. We stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. At 4:18 p.m., the cabin door opened. An older man emerged, 60s maybe, wearing camouflage and carrying a hunting rifle. He moved with military precision, scanning the tree line methodically. Behind him, 2 younger men appeared, both armed. David's camera captured their faces clearly enough for later identification, though it would take 30 years for anyone to analyze the footage. The older man spoke into a radio. Sector 7 clear. No visual on the targets. Targets. They were being hunted. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. We need to get to the road. Now. Which way? Emma whispered. We don't even know where we are. Marcus studied the sun's position through the canopy. West. The access road runs north-south about 3 miles west of the creek. 3 miles. Jake's voice cracked. Through this. At 4:23 p.m., they heard the dogs again. Closer now. Much closer. The baying echoed through the forest from multiple directions, a coordinated search pattern designed to drive them toward. What? The cabin? Other hunters? A trap? They moved west, abandoning any attempt at stealth in favor of speed. David's camera bounced wildly, recording disjointed images, flashes of forest floor, Sarah's terrified face, Marcus pushing through a stand of young pines. At 4:31 p.m., they heard the gunshot. It came from behind them, a single rifle crack that echoed off the canyon walls. Then shouting, male voices calling to each other through the trees. They're hurting us, Ryan said, breathing hard. Driving us somewhere specific. Where? Lisa asked. I don't want to find out, Sarah replied. At 4:45 p.m., they reached a logging road. Old, overgrown, but definitely man-made. Gravel showed through the weeds, and tire tracks were visible in the mud, recent enough to mean active use. Which way? Marcus asked. David was filming the road, panning left and right. To the north, the road curved out of sight around a bend. To the south, it disappeared into heavy forest. North, Emma said, away from the cabin. They followed the road north, staying in the tree line, ready to fade into the forest if they heard vehicles. David's timestamp read 4:52 p.m. when they saw the trucks. 3 of them, parked in a widening of the road about 200 yards ahead. Dark pickups with empty bed liners and tinted windows. Men stood around them, smoking, talking, weapons visible. A roadblock. They were trapped. At 4:55 p.m., David's camera captured the moment everything changed. One of the men by the trucks looked up, staring directly toward their hiding spot. He raised a radio to his mouth, spoke briefly, then pointed in their direction. They see us, Sarah whispered. The men began moving, spreading out, entering the forest with the coordinated efficiency of a military unit. Back, Marcus said. Into the trees. Deep. They retreated into the forest, but it was too late. The hunters knew where they were, and the net was closing. June 19, 1994. Location, Whispering Creek Forest, Idaho. Time, 5:23 p.m. David's camcorder would record for another 17 minutes before the battery died, capturing the final, desperate phase of their flight through the forest. The timestamp showed 5:23 p.m. when they found the ravine. It cut through the forest like a scar, 20 feet deep, sides too steep to climb easily. Water trickled along the bottom, probably a seasonal creek bed. Most importantly, it headed northwest, away from the trucks, away from the cabin, potentially toward the main highway. Down there, Marcus said, it's our best chance. They slid down the muddy sides, landing hard on the rocky bottom. David's camera captured their faces in the fading light. 7 college students who'd started the weekend planning hikes and campfires, now running for their lives through a forest that had become a hunting ground. The ravine was narrow, forcing them to move single file. David filmed over his shoulder, watching for pursuit. The camera caught glimpses of movement on the rim above them. Shadows, figures tracking their progress. At 5:31 p.m., they reached a wider section where another ravine joined theirs. A decision point. Left or right? Sarah asked, checking her camera's film counter. She was down to her last roll. Marcus studied both options. The left fork continued northwest, but seemed to head uphill. The right fork descended more steeply, heading north toward where the highway should be. Right, he decided. Toward the road. At 5:34 p.m., they found the first body. It was lying in the creek bed, partially covered by fallen branches and debris. Female, young, wearing hiking clothes that looked familiar. Too familiar. Emma screamed, the sound echoing off the ravine walls. David's camera captured everything. The position of the body, the obvious trauma, the bright blue rain jacket that matched the fabric they'd found earlier on the trail. Oh God, Lisa whispered. Oh God, oh God. Don't look, Ryan said, trying to move them past. Just keep moving. But Sarah was taking pictures, her photographer's instincts overriding her fear. Evidence, she said when Marcus tried to stop her. We need evidence. At 5:37 p.m., they found the second body. Then the third. The ravine had become a dumping ground, a place where inconvenient hikers and campers disappeared. How many? How long had this been going on? David's battery warning light blinked red, but he kept filming. Whatever was happening here, someone needed to document it. At 5:40 p.m., they heard vehicles on the rim above. Engines, multiple trucks moving parallel to the ravine. Voices calling back and forth, organizing a final sweep. "They're boxing us in," Marcus said. Jake laughed hysterically. "We're going to end up like them. In the creek bed. Nobody will ever find us." "Shut up," Sarah snapped. "Just shut up and keep moving." At 5:43 p.m., David's camera captured the sound of helicopters. The distant thrum of rotors, getting closer. Searchlights stabbed down through the forest canopy, methodical, professional. "Military," Ryan said. "This is bigger than just some drug operation." "Or they called in help," Emma suggested. "Maybe the cavalry's coming." But Marcus shook his head. "Wrong direction. The helicopters are coming from the same direction as the hunters." At 5:47 p.m., the lights found them. Brilliant white beams cutting through the gathering dusk, illuminating the ravine like a movie set. David's camera automatically adjusted to the brightness, capturing their terrified faces in stark detail. Voices echoed from above. "There, in the ravine. All 7. At 5:48 p.m., the shooting started. Not aimed to kill, David realized. Aimed to wound, to slow them down, to make capture easier. Bullets sparked off rocks, kicked up mud from the creek bed. They ran, stumbling over the uneven ground. David's camera recording chaotic glimpses of their final flight. At 5:51 p.m., Emma fell. A bullet caught her in the leg, spinning her around, sending her crashing into the shallow water. She tried to get up, couldn't. "Help me," she gasped. Marcus and Ryan grabbed her arms, hauling her upright. Blood soaked through her jeans, but she could still move. At 5:54 p.m., David's camera captured something that would haunt forensic analysts for decades. As they helped Emma limp through the water, the camera panned across the ravine ahead of them. There, barely visible in the searchlights, was another pile of debris. But this wasn't natural forest detritus. These were clothes, backpacks, camping gear, personal effects from dozens of previous victims. How long had this been going on? How many hikers, campers, hunters had disappeared in these woods? At 5:57 p.m., they reached the end of the ravine. It opened into a wider valley, moonlight illuminating an open meadow beyond the tree line. And there, impossibly, hopefully, were the headlights of vehicles on a road. "The highway," Sarah gasped. "That's the highway." They could make it. 200 yards across open ground to reach help. Witnesses, civilization. At 5:58 p.m., the helicopters descended into the meadow. Not rescue helicopters. Black aircraft without markings, military or paramilitary, landing between them and the road. Men in tactical gear emerged, spreading out in a coordinated formation. "Run," Marcus said one last time. But there was nowhere left to run. At 5:59 p.m., David Kim pressed the record button one final time, buried the camcorder beneath a pile of rocks and debris at the mouth of the ravine, and whispered into the camera, "My name is David Kim. Today is June 19th, 1994. If someone finds this, tell our families we tried to get home." The timestamp read 6 p.m. when the battery finally died. March 15th, 2024. Location: Clearwater National Forest, Idaho. The metal detector sang its electronic song as retired electrician Gary Hoffman swept the device over the forest floor. He'd been working this section of the woods for 3 hours, finding nothing but bottle caps and old tent stakes. The snow had melted early this year, exposing ground that hadn't seen sunlight since November. Gary had been metal detecting for 15 years, ever since his wife passed, and he needed something to fill the quiet weekends. The hobby had taken him all over the Pacific Northwest, searching for lost jewelry, old coins, forgotten pieces of history. He'd found class rings, vintage tools, even a few valuable artifacts. But nothing like what his detector found at 2:17 p.m. on this unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. The signal was strong, definitive. Something metallic buried about 18 inches down in the rocky soil at the mouth of a narrow ravine. Gary started digging with his folding shovel, expecting to find the usual debris, maybe an old camp stove or hiking equipment abandoned by careless campers. What he uncovered was a sealed plastic bag containing a Sony Handycam, still in its original case. Gary held the camera up to the filtered sunlight streaming through the pine canopy. The device looked old, probably from the 1990s based on its bulky design, but the plastic case had protected it from the elements. A piece of duct tape wrapped around the case bore a message written in fading black marker. Evidence. David Kim. June 1994. Gary's hands trembled as he read the words. David Kim. He knew that name. Everyone in Idaho knew that name. Gary called the sheriff's office from his truck, parked 3 miles away on the Forest Service road. 20 minutes later, Deputy Amanda Cross arrived with a crime scene technician and enough coffee to fuel a small investigation. You sure this is where you found it? Deputy Cross asked, studying the disturbed earth. Gary nodded, pointing to the exact spot. Right there, about 1.5 feet down. Whoever buried it did a good job. If I hadn't had the metal detector, nobody would have ever found it. The technician photographed everything before carefully lifting the camera case from its hiding place. Inside the bag, along with the camcorder, were 3 rolls of 35mm film in sealed canisters and a laminated piece of paper with writing on both sides. Deputy Cross read the note aloud. My name is David Kim. University of Idaho student ID 447-9321. If this is found, please contact the Idaho State Police. We discovered something in the forest. People are missing. More people than anyone knows. The tape will show what happened. Tell our families we tried to come home. That evening, in the evidence lab at the Lada County Sheriff's Office, technology specialist Rebecca Martinez connected the 30-year-old camcorder to a modern digital capture device. The battery was long dead, but the internal memory had survived, protected by the camera's robust construction and the sealed environment where it had waited for 3 decades. We're getting signal, Martinez said, adjusting the playback settings. Looks like. Yeah, we've got about 6 hours of footage here. Sheriff Thomas Brennan stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the grainy image resolve on the monitor. He'd been a deputy in 1994 when the 7 college students vanished. He remembered the massive search effort, the federal agents, the way the investigation had suddenly gone cold after 2 weeks of intensive searching. Play it, he said. The first images were innocent enough. 7 young people loading camping gear into cars, laughing, excited about their weekend adventure. Normal college kids doing normal college things. Then the timestamp jumped to the forest, and everything changed. Sheriff Brennan watched in silence as 30 years of questions finally found their answers. The footage was fragmentary, chaotic in places, but it told a story that chilled him to the bone. The mysterious voices in the forest, the evidence of other victims, the organized hunt that had claimed 7 lives. Jesus, Martinez whispered when the tape ended. They documented everything. Brennan was already reaching for his phone. Get me the FBI field office in Boise. And call the Idaho State Police. We're going to need everyone. March 16, 2024. Location: Boise FBI Field Office, Idaho. Special Agent Patricia Wells had investigated dozens of cold cases during her 20-year career with the Bureau, but she'd never seen anything quite like the David Kim footage. She sat in the darkened conference room, watching the playback for the 3rd time, making notes on every detail. Pause it there, she said, pointing to the screen. The technician stopped the video at timestamp 4:18 p.m., the moment when David's camera captured the 3 armed men outside the hidden cabin. The image quality was poor by modern standards, but facial recognition software had already identified 2 of the figures. Raymond Kowalski, 67, deceased 2019, Agent Wells read from the file. Former military, served 2 tours in Vietnam, dishonorably discharged 1973 for assault on a superior officer. Arrested 3 times in the 1980s for illegal hunting, firearms violations, served 18 months in federal prison. She turned to the second file. Marcus Tillman, 43 at the time of the footage, currently 63, residing in Coeur d'Alene. Also former military, decorated sniper, left the service in 1989. Clean record since discharge. The 3rd man remained unidentified, his face too obscured by shadows and poor camera resolution. Agent Wells studied the freeze-frame image of the cabin, noting every detail. The structure was well-built, permanent, designed for long-term occupation. This wasn't a temporary hunting camp or drug operation. This was something more organized, more permanent. Run the footage through enhancement again, she ordered. I want every face, every vehicle, every structure documented. And pull missing person reports for this area going back to 1980. The results came back 6 hours later, and they painted a picture that stunned even experienced investigators. Over the past 40 years, 127 hikers, campers, and hunters had been reported missing in a roughly 50-square-mile area of northern Idaho. Most cases had been classified as presumed accidents, people who'd gotten lost, fallen into ravines, been attacked by wildlife. But David Kim's footage suggested something far more sinister. Agent Wells assembled a task force that afternoon. Local law enforcement, federal agents, forensic specialists, and search and rescue teams. If the Kim footage was accurate, they were dealing with a decades-long pattern of organized murder in the wilderness. "We're going back to that forest," she announced to the assembled team. "And this time, we're bringing everything." March 18, 2024. Location: Clearwater National Forest, Idaho. The convoy of federal and local law enforcement vehicles stretched for nearly a mile along the Forest Service road leading to Whispering Creek. Agent Wells counted 12 FBI vehicles, 6 from the Idaho State Police, 4 local sheriff's units, and 3 specialized search and rescue trucks equipped with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The last time this many officers had entered these woods. Retry. P. Continue. Edit. March 18, 2024. Location: Clearwater National Forest, Idaho. The convoy of federal and local law enforcement vehicles stretched for nearly a mile along the Forest Service road leading to Whispering Creek. Agent Wells counted 12 FBI vehicles, 6 from the Idaho State Police, 4 local sheriff's units, and 3 specialized search and rescue trucks equipped with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The last time this many officers had entered these woods was during the original search for the 7 college students in 1994. That search had lasted 2 weeks, covered over 200 square miles, and found nothing. No bodies, no evidence, no answers. The students had simply vanished, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. But Agent Wells had David Kim's footage now, and it changed everything. The first priority was locating the cabin. David's camera had captured enough landmark footage, distinctive rock formations, the configuration of the clearing, the angle of the surrounding ridgelines, to triangulate its approximate location. GPS coordinates placed it roughly 4 miles northeast of the original Whispering Creek campsite, in a section of forest that hadn't been searched in 1994. At 8:30 a.m., Agent Wells stood beside the command vehicle, studying topographical maps with Sheriff Brennan and search team leader Captain Rodriguez. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of spring snowmelt from the higher elevations. "Based on the footage, we're looking for a structure in a natural clearing, probably near a seasonal creek," Captain Rodriguez said, tracing possible routes on the map. "The camera shows dense forest on 3 sides, open to the south." "What about the ravine?" Sheriff Brennan asked. "The footage shows them ending up in some kind of creek bed with multiple bodies." Agent Wells nodded grimly. "That's priority 2. According to the GPS data from David's camera, the ravine should be here." She pointed to a thin blue line on the map indicating seasonal water flow, about 2 miles northwest of the cabin location. The team spread out in coordinated search patterns, maintaining radio contact as they moved through the forest. Agent Wells accompanied the primary team heading toward the suspected cabin site, her boots crunching on pine needles and patches of remaining snow. At 10:47 a.m., they found it. The cabin sat in a small clearing exactly as David's footage had shown, though 30 years of weather and neglect had taken their toll. The original log structure remained intact, but the metal additions had rusted, and vegetation had begun reclaiming the cleared areas around the building. "Nobody's been here in years," observed Detective Sarah Chun from the Idaho State Police, no relation to the missing student of the same name. She photographed the exterior while forensic specialists prepared to breach the door. Agent Wells approached the structure carefully, weapon drawn, though she suspected it had been abandoned long ago. The generator David's camera had captured was still there, rusted and overgrown with blackberry vines. Fuel barrels sat empty beside what had once been a workshop. "Clear," came the call from inside as the entry team swept through the building. What they found inside documented 30 years of organized horror. The main room had been converted into a monitoring station. Maps of the surrounding forest covered the walls, marked with red X's indicating locations throughout the wilderness. Dates were written beside each mark, ranging from 1981 to 2008. Over 150 marks in total. A logbook sat on a wooden table, its pages yellow with age but still legible. Agent Wells put on gloves before opening it to the first page. June 15, 1981. Subject 1, male, approximately 25, solo hiker, secured near Eagle Point. Subject showed excessive resistance. Terminated. Disposed grid 7A. June 23, 1981. Subject 2, female, approximately 30, day hiker, secured near Bear Creek Trailhead. Compliant. Maintained 6 days. Natural termination. Disposed grid 12C. The entries continued for hundreds of pages, each one documenting the abduction, captivity, and murder of hikers, campers, and hunters who had ventured into the wrong section of wilderness. The clinical language made it even more chilling. People reduced to subjects, murder described as termination, bodies disposed of like waste. Agent Wells found the entry for David Kim's group on page 847. June 19, 1994. 7 subjects, college age, mixed group, evaded initial containment. Subjects discovered disposal site grid 15A, full pursuit authorized. All subjects terminated. Disposed grids 15A through 15G. But there was something else. A note added in different handwriting, different ink. One subject, DK, may have escaped initial sweep. Secondary search conducted. No confirmation of termination. Status, unknown. Agent Wells stared at the entry. According to the official record, all 7 students had been killed. But the secondary note suggested David Kim might have survived the initial attack, at least long enough to hide his camera. In a back room, forensic specialists found the real horror show. Hundreds of personal items hung from hooks and lined shelves like museum displays. Wallets, jewelry, cameras, hiking boots, camping equipment. Each item tagged with a number corresponding to the logbook entries. Agent Wells found Sarah Chen's 35mm camera in a box labeled 1994 June. The film had been removed, but the camera body remained, still bearing Sarah's name on a piece of tape attached to the strap. "My God," whispered Detective Chun, staring at the walls of trophies. How many people? Agent Wells was doing the math. According to this logbook, between 1981 and 2008, this operation killed over 200 people. March 18, 2024. Location, Whispering Creek Forest, Idaho. 3:47 p.m. The ravine team made their first discovery at 3:47 p.m. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Command, this is Search Team 2. We've located the ravine from the footage. You're going to want to see this." Agent Wells hiked 2 miles through dense forest to reach the site, following GPS coordinates provided by the search team. The ravine cut through the landscape exactly as David's camera had shown. Steep sides, rocky bottom, seasonal creek bed now dry except for scattered pools of snowmelt. But it was what they found in the creek bed that confirmed their worst fears. Bodies. Dozens of them, in various states of decomposition ranging from recent to decades old. Some were partially skeletalized, others mummified by the dry mountain air. All showed signs of violence, gunshot wounds, blunt force trauma, evidence of torture. Dr. Emily Vasquez, the forensic anthropologist brought in from Boise, knelt beside the most recent remains, her face grim behind protective gear. "This one's maybe 15 years old," she said, examining the clothing and bone structure. "Adult male, probably in his 20s. Gunshot wound to the chest." She moved to another set of remains further up the ravine. "This one's much older. Could be from the 1980s or early 90s. Female, young adult. Multiple fractures consistent with torture." The search team worked methodically, documenting each body, collecting evidence, trying to piece together decades of systematic murder. Agent Wells walked the length of the ravine, horrified by the scope of what they were uncovering. At the narrow end where David's footage had ended, forensic specialists found evidence of the final confrontation. Bullet impacts in the rock walls, blood traces still visible after 30 years, and scattered personal items from the 7 college students. But no bodies. The 7 friends weren't in the ravine. Agent Wells studied David's final footage again on her tablet, watching the timestamp count down to 6 p.m. when the battery died. The last images showed the black helicopters landing in the meadow, armed men advancing, no escape route left. "Where are they?" she muttered to herself. Detective Chun approached with a handheld GPS unit. "I've been tracking the coordinates from David's footage. Based on his final position when the camera died, they would have been right here." She pointed to a spot near the mouth of the ravine. Agent Wells studied the area. Rocky ground, no obvious disturbance, but then again, 30 years was a long time. She called for the ground-penetrating radar team. The radar painted a picture of the subsurface that made Agent Wells's blood run cold. 7 anomalies, roughly human-sized, buried in a neat row about 30 feet from where David had hidden his camera. "Start digging," she ordered. March 19, 2024. Location: Whispering Creek Forest, Idaho. The excavation began at dawn. Agent Wells stood beside the rectangular excavation site, watching forensic specialists carefully remove soil layer by layer, documenting everything with photographs and measurements. At 10:23 a.m., they found the first body. Female, early 20s, consistent with Emma Walsh, Dr. Vasquez reported, examining the remains. Gunshot wound to the leg, consistent with the footage, and a second wound to the head. Close-range execution. One by one, they uncovered the 7 friends. David Kim, Sarah Chun, Marcus Rodriguez, Jake Morrison, Emma Walsh, Lisa Thompson, Ryan Foster. All executed, all buried in a common grave. All forgotten until a retired electrician's metal detector sang its electronic song over the place where David had hidden the truth. Each body told part of the story. Sarah still clutched her camera, the final roll of film intact after 3 decades underground. Marcus's compass was still in his pocket, pointing north toward a home he'd never see again. Jake's wallet contained a photo of his girlfriend, a restaurant receipt from their last dinner together, and a ticket stub from a movie they'd seen the night before leaving for their camping trip. But it was David's body that provided the final pieces of the puzzle. In his jacket pocket, wrapped in plastic, was a small notebook with pages covered in tiny handwriting. Agent Wells read the final entry aloud to the assembled team. June 19, 1994, approximately 6:15 p.m. They caught us. All of us. The men from the cabin, the helicopters, they were working together. Military or paramilitary operation. They've been killing people in these woods for years. Decades. We found the bodies. We saw too much. They can't let us leave. The leader, older man with gray hair, said this was about maintaining operational security. Said the forest was a testing ground, and we were contamination. They're going to kill us, but first they want to know if we told anyone where we were going, if anyone else knows about this place. Sarah told them we were expected back Monday, that people would look for us. He laughed, said they'd been managing lost hikers for 20 years, that 7 more wouldn't matter. They separated us, taking us one by one. Emma's screaming stopped about an hour ago. I can hear Jake crying. They're going to come for me soon. If someone finds this, tell the world what happened here. This isn't random. This is organized. Government, military, something big. They've been using this forest as a killing ground. Tell our families we fought. Tell them we tried to come home. The notebook contained one more crucial piece of information: license plate numbers. David had memorized the plates on 3 of the vehicles he'd seen, scribbling them down in his final minutes. Agent Wells ran the plates through federal databases. 2 came back to a private military contractor that had operated in the region during the 1990s. The 3rd belonged to a vehicle registered to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. March 20th, 2024. Location: FBI Field Office, Boise, Idaho. The briefing room was standing room only. Agent Wells faced an audience of federal agents, military investigators, congressional staffers, and representatives from the Department of Justice. The David Kim footage played on multiple screens while she presented 3 days of findings. What we've uncovered in the Clearwater National Forest represents one of the largest serial killing operations in American history, she began. Between 1981 and 2008, we estimate over 200 people were murdered in an organized campaign that used federal wilderness as a testing ground for psychological operations, interrogation techniques, and disposal methods. The room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the scratch of pens on notepads. Based on evidence recovered from the site, this operation was conducted by a joint military-civilian team with significant resources and official protection. The logistics alone, helicopters, vehicles, communications equipment, long-term facility maintenance, suggest institutional support. Agent Wells clicked to the next slide, showing the organizational chart they'd pieced together from recovered documents. Raymond Kowalski, the leader, was a former Army Special Operations officer who recruited other ex-military personnel for what he called Project Clearwater. The operation was funded through a series of shell companies connected to defense contractors working on classified projects. Congressional staffer Michelle Torres raised her hand. Are you saying this was an authorized government operation? We're saying it had government connections, Agent Wells replied carefully. Whether it was authorized, tolerated, or concealed is still under investigation. The implications were staggering. For nearly 3 decades, a section of American wilderness had been used as a private killing ground where military contractors tested techniques on unwilling civilian subjects. Hikers, campers, hunters, anyone who wandered into the wrong area at the wrong time became part of an experiment in murder. Agent Wells continued her presentation, detailing the evidence trail that connected the forest operation to broader networks of government contractors and military units. Financial records, communications intercepts, testimony from surviving participants, all pointing to a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military and intelligence agencies. The operation ceased in 2008, she noted, following the death of Raymond Kowalski and increased federal oversight of contractor activities. But the cover-up continued for another 16 years, until David Kim's camera finally gave us the evidence we needed. March 25, 2024. Location: University of Idaho, Moscow, Idaho. The memorial service filled the university's basketball arena to capacity. 7 empty chairs sat on the stage, each draped with a University of Idaho banner and surrounded by flowers. Photos of the students, young, smiling, full of promise, filled screens around the venue. Agent Wells sat in the front row beside the families, watching as speakers shared memories of the 7 friends who died trying to enjoy a weekend in the wilderness. Sarah's father spoke about her dreams of becoming a photojournalist. Marcus's mother shared stories of his love for the outdoors and his plans to become a forest ranger. Emma's sister displayed some of her final sketches, drawn during those last days in the forest. But it was David Kim's parents who delivered the most powerful testimony. His father, Dr. James Kim, spoke about his son's decision to bring the camcorder on the trip. David was always documenting things, Dr. Kim said, his voice steady despite his tears. He said life was too precious not to record, that people needed to see the truth about the world. He never stopped recording, even when he knew it might cost him his life. Because of that choice, because of his courage, the truth finally came out. The university announced the establishment of the 7 Friends Memorial Fund, dedicated to wilderness safety education and supporting families of missing persons. A section of the Clearwater National Forest was designated as a memorial wilderness area, forever protected from development or exploitation. But perhaps the most important outcome was the ongoing investigation into the government contractors and military personnel who had enabled the killing operation. Over the following months, federal prosecutors would bring charges against 17 individuals connected to Project Clearwater, including 3 who were still alive and active in government service. April 15, 2024. Location: Clearwater Memorial Wilderness, Idaho. Agent Wells returned to the forest one final time, hiking alone to the spot where Gary Hoffman had found David's camera. The area looked different now. Peaceful, cleaned of the horror that had festered here for decades. The FBI had removed all evidence, filled in the excavation sites, and posted new trail markers warning hikers about the area's history. She carried with her a small metal plaque, approved by the National Forest Service and the families of the 7 students. At the mouth of the ravine where David had buried his camera, she secured the plaque to a large pine tree. The inscription read, "In memory of David Kim, Sarah Chun, Marcus Rodriguez, Jake Morrison, Emma Walsh, Lisa Thompson, and Ryan Foster. 7 friends who came to these woods seeking adventure and beauty, and who died trying to expose the truth. Their courage ensured that this place of hidden horror became a place of remembrance and justice. Tell our families we tried to come home." David Kim, June 19, 1994. Agent Wells stood in silence for several minutes, listening to the sound of wind through the pines and water trickling through the creek bed. The forest felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from the land itself. As she prepared to hike back to her vehicle, movement caught her eye. A flash of color in the trees, gone almost before she registered it. For a moment, her heart raced, muscle memory from months of investigating this case, making her hand move toward her weapon. But it was just a group of day hikers, college students like the seven friends had been, enjoying the wilderness as it was meant to be enjoyed. Free from fear, free from the horror that had hidden here for so long. They waved as they passed, laughing about something, their voices echoing through the trees. Young people with their whole lives ahead of them, their futures bright with possibility. Agent Wells smiled and waved back. This was what David Kim had died for. The right of people to explore the wilderness without fear, to document the beauty of the world, to trust that the places meant to preserve nature's wonder would never again be perverted into hunting grounds for human predators. The truth had finally set them free. June 19, 2024. Location: Moscow, Idaho. On the 30th anniversary of their disappearance, the University of Idaho held a special ceremony at the Seven Friends Memorial Garden, planted on campus in honor of the victims. Representatives from the FBI, the National Forest Service, and families of the missing students gathered to dedicate a new memorial sculpture. 7 bronze figures arranged in a circle, looking up at the sky, representing the enduring bond of friendship that death could not break. Dr. James Kim, now in his 80s, spoke for the families. "Our children went into those woods as friends," he said, "and they died as heroes. They could have stayed quiet, could have tried to hide, could have prioritized their own survival over the truth. Instead, they documented what they found, preserved the evidence, and ensured that justice would eventually come." He paused, looking at the bronze figures catching the late afternoon sunlight. David always said that the camera never lies, that if you're brave enough to point it at the truth will eventually find its way to the light. It took 30 years, but he was right. In the months that followed, the Clearwater case would lead to broader investigations into contractor operations, military oversight, and the use of public lands for classified projects. Congressional hearings would expose decades of abuse, and new legislation would be passed to prevent similar operations from ever again using American wilderness as a testing ground for horrors. But perhaps most importantly, the story of the 7 friends would inspire a new generation of young people to trust their instincts, document what they see, and never stop fighting for the truth, even when the darkness seems overwhelming. Because sometimes, when you're brave enough to keep the camera rolling, when you're willing to bury the evidence where someone might someday find it, when you refuse to let evil hide in the shadows, the truth eventually finds its way home. And the light, as David Kim discovered, is always stronger than the darkness.